Welcome, warriors and history lovers. Before we dive into this incredible Viking tale, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more epic Nordic stories. Hit that like button if you're ready for an adventure, and comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. We love connecting with our global Viking community. Now, let's journey back to the age of steel and saga. The bitter winds of late autumn howled across the rocky shores of Fjord, carrying with them the scent of salt, seaweed, and something far more ominous, smoke. Thick, black columns rose from what had once been the thriving settlement of Fjord, now reduced to smouldering ruins and scattered bodies. The great longhouses that had sheltered 3 generations of Norse families lay collapsed, their carved dragon heads now nothing more than charred timber reaching toward a grey, unforgiving sky. Among the devastation, a single figure moved with the careful, measured steps of a man who had seen too many battles and buried too many friends. Ragnar Ironbeard, at 63 winters old, was a relic of a bygone era. His once golden hair had long since turned the colour of winter frost, braided with silver rings that caught what little light filtered through the smoke-filled air. Deep scars crisscrossed his weathered face and massive arms, each one telling a story of survival against impossible odds. His piercing blue eyes, still sharp despite his age, surveyed the destruction with the calculating gaze of a veteran warrior. The leather and mail hauberk he wore bore the marks of countless conflicts, patched and repatched, but still functional. At his side hung Grimnir's fang, a sword that had tasted the blood of Saxon raiders, Frankish knights, and rival jarls across 4 decades of warfare. The weapon's pommel was carved in the likeness of a wolf's head, its eyes set with amber that seemed to glow with an inner fire. The attack had come at dawn, 3 days past. Not from rival clans or foreign invaders, but from something far worse. Something that defied the natural order of the world, as the Norse understood it. The great serpent had descended from the northern mountains like a living storm, its scales the deep red of fresh blood, its breath a torrent of flame that turned men to ash in heartbeats. The dragon, for what else could such a creature be called, had swept down upon Fjord with a fury that spoke of ancient grudges and primal rage. Ragnar had been checking his fish traps in the early morning mist when the screaming began. By the time he reached the settlement, running despite his aging joints, protesting with every step, half the village was already ablaze. He had watched from the tree line as the great beast tore through the defensive walls his grandfather had built, its claws rending stone as easily as a blade cuts through cloth. The dragon's roar still echoed in his memory, a sound like thunder and tearing metal combined, so deep and powerful that it seemed to shake the very bones of the earth. Its eyes had been the most terrifying aspect, intelligent and malevolent, burning with a hatred that seemed older than the mountains themselves. This was no mindless beast driven by hunger or territory. This creature killed with purpose, with deliberate, calculated malice. Now, as Ragnar picked his way through the ruins of his home, he found the bodies of people he had known since childhood. Thorvald, the shipwright, whose hands had crafted the finest vessels in 3 fjords, lay sprawled beside the skeleton of his workshop. His tools were scattered around him, useless against claws the length of sayax blades. Nearby, the remains of Astrid the Wise Woman could be identified only by the iron brooch she always wore, its wolf design now twisted by intense heat. The silence was perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the aftermath. Fjord had always been alive with sound, the ring of hammer on anvil from the smithy, the laughter of children playing between the houses, the constant murmur of daily life in a thriving community. Now there was only the whisper of wind through broken timbers and the distant cry of ravens gathering for their grim feast. As he approached what had been the great hall, Ragnar's weathered hands clenched into fists. This building had stood for over a century, its massive oak beams brought from the forests of the south in his great-grandfather's time. The carved pillars that had supported the roof bore the stories of their clan's greatest victories and most honored dead. All of it was gone now, reduced to a pile of ash and twisted metal. But it was what he found in the hall's ruins that truly shook the old warrior to his core. The body of Jarl Erik, his oldest friend and the settlement's leader, lay pinned beneath a fallen beam. Eric's face was peaceful, almost serene, but his sword arm had been severed cleanly, not burned like so many others, but cut with surgical precision. Around his neck, the golden torque that marked his status as Jarl was untouched by flame, gleaming mockingly in the dim light. "Why, old friend?" Ragnar whispered, his voice hoarse from the smoke he had inhaled over the past 3 days. "Why did it spare me when it took everyone else?" The question had haunted him since the attack. He had been close enough to see the dragon clearly, close enough that its terrible gaze had fallen upon him. For a moment that stretched like an eternity, those burning eyes had locked with his own. He had felt the weight of an intelligence vast and alien, had sensed curiosity rather than immediate hostility. Then inexplicably, the great beast had turned away, completing its destruction of the settlement before disappearing back into the northern wastes. Ragnar had survived battles from the Irish coast to the gates of Constantinople. He had faced berserkers in blood rage, Saxon shield walls, and storms that had sent lesser men to their knees in terror. But never had he felt as small and helpless as he had in that moment when the dragon chose to let him live. The sound of approaching footsteps broke through his grim reverie. Multiple figures emerged from the forest path that led to Fjord, moving with the confident stride of warriors. As they drew closer, Ragnar could make out their details. A war band of perhaps 20 men, all well-armed and bearing the sea-weathered look of professional fighters. Their leader was a man in the prime of life, tall and broad-shouldered, with hair the color of burnished copper and a beard braided with silver wire. "Ragnar Ironbeard," the leader called out as his band approached the ruins. "I am Olaf the Sea-Wolf, Jarl of Stormhaven. Word has reached us of what happened here." Ragnar straightened, his hand instinctively moving to rest on Grimnir's fang's pommel. Despite his age, his warrior's instincts remained sharp. "Olaf Sea-Wolf, your reputation precedes you. What brings a Jarl of your standing to these cursed ruins?" Olaf's green eyes swept across the devastation with the practiced gaze of a man accustomed to violence and its aftermath. His expression was grim, but not entirely unsympathetic. "Dragons, old wolf. The great serpent that did this has been seen moving south, toward the rich settlements of the inner fjords. Already 3 fishing villages have been reduced to ash. The High King has called for champions to hunt the beast." "Champions?" Ragnar's voice carried a bitter edge. "You mean sacrifices? How many warriors do you think that creature has already killed? How many spears have shattered against its hide? How many blades have turned to slag in its flame?" One of Olaf's men, a younger warrior with the cocky bearing of someone who had never faced true defeat, stepped forward. "Perhaps if the defenders had been younger, stronger, the outcome might have been different. No offense intended to your years, grandfather." The insult hung in the air like smoke from the ruins around them. Ragnar's eyes narrowed to slits of ice-blue fury, and several of Olaf's more experienced warriors unconsciously stepped back. They recognized the look of a man who had killed more enemies than they had seen summers. "Careful, whelp," Ragnar said, his voice deadly quiet. "These old bones have sent better men than you to the halls of the dead. Age brings wisdom, and wisdom teaches us that some fights cannot be won with youth and enthusiasm alone." Olaf raised a hand to silence his subordinate before the situation could escalate further. "Peace, all of you. We're not here to trade insults or measure sword arms. Ragnar, you're the only survivor of the dragon's attack. You've seen the beast up close and lived to tell of it. The king needs that knowledge." "The king?" Ragnar spat into the ashes at his feet. "And where was the king when my people burned? Where were his champions when children died screaming in the flames?" "The same place you were, old wolf," Olaf replied without heat, "trying to survive something that shouldn't exist in the world of men. The dragon appeared without warning, struck without mercy, and vanished like morning mist. But now we have a chance to track it, to end its rampage before more innocent blood is spilled. Ragnar was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving across the ruins of everything he had known and loved. The weight of 63 winters pressed down on his shoulders, but beneath the exhaustion and grief, something else stirred. The same fire that had driven him to greatness in his youth, now tempered by decades of hard-won wisdom. "You speak of tracking the dragon," he said finally. But this was no ordinary attack. The beast didn't strike randomly or from hunger. It came here with purpose, seeking something specific. And when it found me, he paused, remembering those terrible eyes boring into his soul. It chose to let me live. That suggests intelligence, planning. This creature isn't just a monster to be hunted. It's an enemy to be outwitted. Olaf nodded slowly, his respect for the older warrior evident in his expression. "Then join us, Ragnar Ironbeard. Lend us your experience, your knowledge of the beast. Help us succeed where others have failed." "And what makes you think this time will be different?" Ragnar asked. "What advantage do you possess that the warriors of Greenvale and Fisherman's Bay lacked?" The Jarl's smile was sharp as a sword's edge. "Because this time we have the only man the dragon chose to spare. If it wanted you alive for a reason, then perhaps that reason can be turned against it. Sometimes the gods work in ways we don't understand until the moment of truth arrives." As if in response to his words, a distant roar echoed across the fjord, deep, thunderous, and unmistakably familiar. All eyes turned northward, toward the mist-shrouded peaks, where shadows seemed to dance with unnatural life. The dragon was still out there, still hunting, still killing, and somewhere in the vast expanse of the northern wilderness, it was waiting. Ragnar felt the weight of destiny settling around him like a cloak. Perhaps the gods did have a plan after all. Perhaps his survival was not random mercy, but part of some greater design. He thought of Eric's peaceful face, of Astrid's twisted brooch, of all the lives lost in flames and terror. The dead deserved justice, and the living deserved protection. "Very well, Sea-Wolf," he said, his voice carrying the iron resolve that had made him a legend in his prime. "I'll join your hunt. But we do this my way, with patience and cunning rather than blind courage. The dragon has lived for longer than any of us can imagine. It won't be brought down by conventional tactics." As the warband prepared to leave the ruins of Ironfjord behind, none of them noticed the figure watching from the distant tree line. Cloaked in shadow and silence, the observer had witnessed everything: the destruction, the conversation, the formation of what might prove to be the dragon's most dangerous opposition yet. When the warriors finally departed, heading south toward whatever destiny awaited them, the watcher remained for a moment longer before melting back into the forest like smoke on the wind. The hunt was about to begin in earnest, but the true question remained: who was hunting whom? The journey south from Ironfjord took Olaf's war band through some of the most treacherous terrain in the northern lands. Ancient pine forests stretched endlessly in all directions, their canopy so thick that noon felt like twilight beneath the interwoven branches. The path they followed was little more than a game trail, winding between moss-covered boulders and across streams that ran black with tannins from the forest floor. Ragnar moved with the steady, economical pace of a man who had learned to conserve his strength for when it mattered most. Despite his age, he showed no signs of fatigue as they climbed the rocky slopes that led toward the pass, known as Fenrir's Gate. The younger warriors, initially skeptical of bringing an old man on such a dangerous mission, had begun to view him with grudging respect as the miles passed without complaint. The weather had turned colder as they gained elevation, and their breath formed small clouds in the crisp air. Snow dusted the highest peaks visible through breaks in the tree cover, a reminder that winter was approaching faster than anyone would have preferred. In the far north, winter meant more than cold and darkness. It meant isolation, when the deep snows would cut off settlements from each other for months at a time. As they crested a particularly steep ridge, the forest opened into a small clearing dominated by an ancient stone circle. The monoliths were weathered and worn, covered with lichen and carved with runes so old that their meaning had been lost to all but the most learned of skalds. At the center of the circle, a fire crackled merrily, its smoke rising straight up in the still air. Beside the fire sat a figure that made even the bravest of Olaf's warriors unconsciously reach for their weapons. The man was impossibly tall and lean, draped in a cloak that seemed to shift color between gray and blue and black with each movement. His wide-brimmed hat cast his face in shadow, but beneath it a single eye gleamed with an intensity that was both ancient and ageless. Where his other eye should have been, an empty socket stared blindly at the world. "Greetings, travelers," the stranger said, his voice carrying easily across the clearing despite being barely above a whisper. "I've been expecting you." Olaf's hand rested on his sword hilt as he studied the mysterious figure. There were stories told around winter fires of such wanderers, beings that appeared at crossroads and moments of great decision, offering wisdom to those brave enough to listen and doom to those foolish enough to ignore their warnings. "And who might you be, old man?" Olaf asked, his tone carefully neutral. "This is a lonely place to make camp." The stranger's visible eyes seemed to twinkle with amusement. "Lonely? Hardly that, young Jarl. These stones have witnessed the passage of countless souls over the years. Kings and beggars, heroes and cowards, the living and the dead, all have passed through this circle in their time." He gestured to the space around the fire. "Please warm yourselves. The night grows cold, and you have far yet to travel." Ragnar stepped forward before Olaf could respond, his warrior's instincts telling him something important was happening. "You said you were expecting us. How could you know of our coming?" "I know many things, Ragnar Ironbeard," the stranger replied, and there was something in the way he spoke the name that made it sound like an old song, full of hidden meanings. "I know that the dragon's fire burns in your dreams. I know that you carry the weight of unanswered questions like stones in your heart, and I know that the path you walk leads to a choice that will echo through the ages." The warriors exchanged uneasy glances. This was clearly no ordinary traveler, but something far more significant. Several of the younger men made subtle gestures to ward off evil, while the veterans simply watched and waited for their leaders to decide how to proceed. "Speak plainly, wanderer," Olaf demanded. "If you have wisdom to share, then share it. If you're here to speak in riddles and prophecies, we have no time for such games." The stranger's laugh was like wind through autumn leaves. "Games? Oh, my young sea-wolf, this is no game at all. The creature you hunt is older than your grandfather's grandfather's grandfather. It remembers when these lands were covered by ice, when your people were nothing more than a dream in the minds of distant gods. You think to face it with swords and spears, with courage and determination?" He shook his head sadly. "Such weapons are less than worthless against what you seek." "Then what would you have us do?" Ragnar asked, settling himself on one of the fallen logs that surrounded the fire. Something about the stranger's manner suggested that this encounter was necessary, even if its purpose wasn't yet clear. "Should we abandon the hunt, let the dragon continue its slaughter unchallenged? I would have you understand what you truly face," the stranger replied. He reached into his cloak and withdrew a drinking horn, intricately carved with scenes of battle and decorated with silver wire. Steam rose from whatever liquid it contained, carrying the scent of honey and herbs. "The dragon you call a monster was once something else entirely, a guardian, a protector of ancient secrets. But guardians can become corrupted, their noble purpose twisted into something dark and vengeful." He offered the horn to Ragnar, who accepted it after only a moment's hesitation. The liquid within was warm and sweet, with an undertone of something wild and fierce that seemed to spread fire through his veins. As he drank, images flashed through his mind, visions of the dragon as it had been long ago, its scales gleaming gold instead of blood red, its eyes filled with wisdom rather than rage. Long ago, the stranger continued as Ragnar passed the horn to Olaf. When the world was younger and magic flowed like rivers through the land, the great serpent was bound by sacred oaths to protect the treasures of the old gods. Gold and silver were the least of these treasures. The dragon guarded knowledge, artifacts of power, secrets that could reshape the very fabric of reality. The horn continued to make its way around the circle, and with each warrior who drank, their eyes grew distant as visions filled their minds. They saw the dragon in its original form, magnificent and terrible in its beauty, coiled around a vast hoard that contained not just material wealth, but the crystallized essence of ancient wisdom. What changed it? Olaf asked, his voice hoarse from whatever he had experienced in his vision. What transformed a guardian into a destroyer? The stranger's expression grew grim, and for a moment the shadows seemed to deepen around them despite the crackling fire. Betrayal, greed, the oldest sins known to mortal kind. Men came seeking the treasure, as men always do. They were clever, these thieves, and they knew that the dragon could not be defeated by force. So they used cunning instead. He stood and began to pace around the fire, his movements fluid despite his apparent age. They discovered the binding words that held the dragon to its duty, the sacred oaths that prevented it from leaving its post. And then, with careful manipulation and false promises, they convinced the great serpent that its treasures would be safer if moved to a new location, far from the growing threats of the changing world. And the dragon believed them? One of the younger warriors asked, his voice filled with disbelief. The dragon trusted them, the stranger corrected. There is a difference. Trust is a precious thing, and when it is broken, the wound cuts deeper than any blade. The thieves used the dragon's own honor against it, turned its sense of duty into a weapon for their own ends. Ragnar felt pieces of a vast puzzle beginning to fit together in his mind. They stole from it, not just gold or jewels, but something far more precious. Indeed, the stranger nodded approvingly. They took the heart of the mountain, a gem of such purity and power that it held the dragon's very essence within its crystalline structure. With the heart in their possession, they could command the great serpent, force it to serve their will rather than its ancient purpose. The fire crackled and sparked, sending embers spiraling up into the darkening sky. Around them, the forest had grown silent, as if even the animals sensed that momentous events were unfolding. For generations, the dragon was enslaved, the stranger continued, made to fight in petty wars, forced to destroy rather than protect, compelled to use its might for conquest instead of guardianship. The corruption spread through its being like poison, twisting its noble nature into something dark and vengeful. When the bloodline of its enslavers finally died out, the binding was broken. But by then, the damage was done. So now it kills indiscriminately, Olaf said, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. It's no longer capable of distinguishing between innocent and guilty. All humans are seen as potential threats, potential betrayers. Not all, the stranger said quietly, his single eye fixed on Ragnar. The dragon still remembers its original purpose, buried deep beneath layers of pain and rage. Sometimes, very rarely, it encounters someone who reminds it of what it once was, of the noble calling it once served. In such moments, the old nature surfaces briefly, and mercy stays its hand. The implications of those words hit Ragnar like a physical blow. It spared me because it saw something familiar, something that reminded it of better times. You carry the blood of those who once served the old gods faithfully, the stranger confirmed. Your ancestors were among the few who approached the dragon's domain with respect rather than greed, who understood that some treasures are meant to be guarded rather than possessed. The dragon recognizes that heritage, even if it can no longer fully trust it. Silence fell over the group as they absorbed this revelation. The dragon was not simply a monster to be slain, but a wounded creature driven to madness by betrayal and abuse. The knowledge changed everything about their mission, transformed it from a simple hunt into something far more complex and dangerous. "How do we heal such a wound?" Ragnar asked finally. "How do we restore a guardian that has forgotten its purpose?" The stranger smiled, and for the first time it seemed genuinely warm rather than mysterious. "By returning what was stolen, by proving that not all humans are thieves and betrayers, by showing the dragon that honor and trust still exist in the world of men." "The heart of the mountain," Olaf breathed. "It still exists." "Oh yes, it exists," the stranger confirmed, "hidden away in the treasury of a king who has no idea of its true significance, treated as nothing more than a pretty bauble to impress visiting dignitaries. The irony is almost amusing. The key to healing one of the world's greatest guardians sits forgotten on a shelf, gathering dust." He reached into his cloak again and withdrew a small leather pouch, which he tossed to Ragnar. Inside were several items that gleamed in the firelight: a compass made of carved bone and silver, a small crystal vial filled with what looked like liquid starlight, and a piece of parchment covered with intricate maps and runic inscriptions. "The compass will lead you to the heart," the stranger explained. "The vial contains water from the well of memory. 3 drops on the dragon's tongue will restore its ability to remember its true nature, and the map shows the location of the ancient binding circle where the original oaths were sworn. Only there can the dragon's healing be completed." Ragnar studied the items carefully, feeling their weight, both physical and metaphorical. "And if we succeed, if we manage to restore the dragon to what it once was, then you will have saved not just the kingdoms of men, but returned one of the world's greatest guardians to its proper purpose," the stranger replied. "The treasures it protected were not hoarded for greed, but preserved for future generations who would prove worthy of their power. Knowledge that could feed the hungry, heal the sick, bring peace to warring lands, all of this and more waits for those with the wisdom to use it well." As the stranger spoke, he began to fade, becoming translucent like morning mist. The fire continued to burn, but its light seemed to dim as if the fuel was being consumed at an impossible rate. "Wait!" Olaf called out, rising to his feet. "You haven't told us who you are, why you've chosen to help us." The figure was barely visible now, more shadow than substance. "I am a wanderer, as I said. I have walked many roads and seen many wonders, and sometimes, when the threads of fate converge at a crucial moment, I am permitted to offer guidance to those who might change the course of history." His voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "But know this, the path ahead will test more than your courage and skill. It will test your very souls, your capacity for compassion and forgiveness. The dragon is not the only one who must choose between vengeance and redemption." With those final words, he vanished completely, leaving only the crackling fire and the scent of distant storms. The warriors sat in stunned silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts about what they had heard and seen. Finally, Ragnar rose and carefully tucked the pouch into his belt. "Well, Sea-Wolf, it seems our hunt has become something else entirely. Are you still willing to follow this path, knowing what we now know?" Olaf looked around at his men, reading the determination in their faces, despite the fear that also lurked there. "We came here to stop a monster. Now we learn that the monster is a victim, and the only way to stop it is to heal it. I won't lie. This path seems more dangerous than anything we originally planned. But the goal remains the same: protect the innocent, end the killing. If there's a chance to do that without more bloodshed, then we have to try." One by one, the other warriors nodded their agreement. They were hard men, accustomed to solving problems with steel and strength, but they were also honorable men who understood that true heroism sometimes meant choosing the difficult path over the simple one. As they prepared to continue their journey, now armed with new knowledge and purpose, none of them noticed the pair of glowing eyes watching from the darkness beyond the stone circle. The dragon had been tracking them since they left Iron Fjord, drawn by instincts it didn't fully understand. It had watched the encounter with the Wanderer, had heard words that stirred half-remembered feelings deep in its corrupted heart. For the first time in centuries, something other than rage and pain flickered in those ancient eyes. It was faint, barely perceptible, but it was there, a spark of the noble creature it had once been. The dragon spread its massive wings and took to the sky, following the warriors as they made their way through the night. The hunt continued, but now it was unclear who was the hunter and who was the prey. 3 months after the events at the Binding Circle, the skald Thorkel the Wordweaver sits by the great fire in the hall of King Magnus the Bold. Around him, warriors and nobles lean forward to catch every word of the tale he weaves. A story that has already begun to spread across the northern lands like wildfire. And so it was, Thorkel concludes, his voice carrying the weight of ancient wisdom, that Ragnar Ironbeard, the last survivor of Iron Fjord, became not the dragon slayer, but its savior. Where others saw only a monster to be destroyed, he saw a wounded guardian that could be healed. A young warrior near the fire raises his drinking horn. But did they truly succeed, Skald? Did the dragon's rage finally end? Thorkel's eyes twinkle in the firelight. They say that on clear nights, when the northern lights dance across the sky, you can still see the great serpent flying over the mountain peaks, but its scales shine gold now instead of blood-red, and it brings protection rather than destruction to those who treat the ancient places with respect. An old woman wrapped in furs speaks from the shadows. My grandson is a fisherman on the northern coast. He swears that when the storms grow fierce and threaten to dash ships against the rocks, a great golden shape appears in the clouds, calming the winds and guiding vessels safely to harbor. And what of Ragnar himself? Asks another voice. What became of the old warrior? The skald's expression grows thoughtful. Some say he returned to the ruins of Ironfjord and rebuilt it into a place of learning, where the ancient wisdom preserved by the dragon's hoard could be studied and shared. Others claim he joined the dragon as its companion, helping to guard the treasures of the old gods for future generations who might prove worthy of their power. But the truth, he continues with a mysterious smile, is known only to the winds, and the stones, the stars, and the sea. What matters is not the end of the tale, but the lesson it teaches, that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from destroying our enemies, but from understanding them. That courage is not always about facing death, but about choosing compassion over vengeance. The fire crackles and sparks, casting dancing shadows on the carved pillars of the great hall. Outside, the wind howls with the approach of winter, but inside, the warmth of the flames and the power of the story keep the darkness at bay. Remember this, all of you, Thorkel says as the gathering begins to disperse. When you face your own dragons, whether they breathe fire or live in the darkness of your own hearts, remember Ragnar Ironbeard and the choice he made. Sometimes the most heroic act is not to raise your sword, but to extend your hand in peace. As the last of the listeners make their way to their sleeping quarters, the skald remains by the dying fire, gazing into its glowing embers. In their depths, he sees visions of a great golden dragon soaring through starlit skies, no longer alone in its eternal vigil. And somewhere in the northern wastes, in a settlement rebuilt on the bones of tragedy, an old warrior tends his fish traps in the early morning mist, his weathered face peaceful at last. The legend of Ragnar Ironbeard and the Dragon of the North would be told for generations to come, inspiring countless warriors to seek understanding before battle, compassion before conquest. And perhaps, in some distant age, when the world has forgotten the old ways, the tale would still be whispered around fires on cold winter nights, a reminder that even the most ancient wounds can heal, and that redemption is possible for all who have the courage to seek it. The dragon still flies in the northern skies, they say, and on quiet nights, when the world is still and the stars shine bright, You can hear its song, no longer a roar of rage and pain, but a hymn of protection and hope, carried on the wings of legend into eternity. Warriors and saga lovers, this legend of redemption and courage ends here, but your journey with us continues. If this tale of the dragon and the last Viking stirred your warrior's heart, smash that like button and subscribe for more epic Nordic legends. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Ragnar's place? Would you have chosen the sword or the path of healing? And don't forget to ring the notification bell, so you never miss our latest adventures into the realm of Vikings and ancient lore. Skull, brave souls, until we meet again in the halls of legend.